I hated it. The Haunting of Hill House is a Netflix original series created by Mike Flanagan. Decades after a traumatic stay at a haunted house, a family still tortured by their past must come together to save their future. The Haunting of Hill House shows us a family between two timelines. The first timeline takes place in the early 90s when the family was happy and together. Parents Olivia and Hugh are real estate investors who move the 5 children from home to home as they flip houses. Hill House is to be their final job before they build what the mother calls their forever house. But the second timeline jumps to the present day, showing a family fractured into pieces, haunted by their past, and without a forever home. When the family is forced to come together, we explore the mystery of Hill House, how it changed their lives forever, and how, if at all, they can move forward. I'd like to start this by saying that I believe the show's creator, Mike Flanagan, is undoubtedly in the top 5 living directors. Oculus, Hush, and Gerald's Game are all, in my opinion, masterpieces. I don't think I'm overpraising these movies. If anything, these movies have not gotten enough praise. Like John Carpenter, the films he's made have presented a very different way to approach the horror genre that I believe will be studied and admired for years and years to come. At the time of writing this, I have not seen Dr. Sleep, but I've heard this movie, although failing at the box office, was another one of these masterpieces. Where Carpenter changed the horror genre with his minimalist approach to filmmaking, Flanagan shows us how to approach the horror genre with heart. A lot of heart. Flanagan is a master at creating emotionally engaging characters. When Hush or Gerald's Game comes to an end, you do not feel like you've just witnessed yet another final girl horror trope. You feel like you've watched a character come to the end of a serious emotional arc. For this, Hush and Gerald's Game are 2 of my favorite horror films of all time. And I will say again, Flanagan should be at a level of fame with John Carpenter, Stephen King, and even Steven Spielberg. The praise finally came his way for The Haunting of Hill House, a show for which he wrote or co-wrote almost every episode and directed every episode, which is a major creative achievement in and of itself. The show was quickly labeled as one of the best Netflix original series to date, one of the greatest horror anthologies, and, you guessed it, a masterpiece. I personally think people were fooled by overcharacterization, ambiguity, and an incredibly well-crafted show. In the end, I don't feel that Hill House holds a candle to Flanagan's best work, yet it has received more attention and praise than anything else he's done. When the show first came out, I attempted to watch it. I was immediately turned off by certain aspects and didn't get past the first episode. First off, the house is too creepy. Upon my first viewing, I did not notice the fact that the family was there to fix up the house, sell it for profit, and move out. So I couldn't believe anyone would live there. Like, who would walk into a house that looks so creepy and think, yep, this is home? Upon second viewing, I found the house to set the mood very well. Number 2, Henry Thomas and the contact lenses. For whatever reason, they chose to have Timothy Hutton play the older version of the father character. Therefore, the younger version, played by Henry Thomas, wears blue contacts that I found incredibly fake and distracting. Number 3, the mother's look. Although the first timeline takes place in 1992, the mother often looks like she's dressed for a long time before 1992. Again, upon second viewing, I felt like this helped to create creepy atmosphere, but initially it was distracting. Now in 2020, The Haunting of Bly Manor has been released. My girlfriend Leah started watching the show from Season 1, Episode 1. As I walked in and out of the living room, catching moments here and there, spoilers don't bother me anymore because that's an explanation I'll have to give another time. I realized there may be something more to the show than I thought. There were long scenes of only characters and dialogue. Most horror productions don't have the courage to slow down enough to focus on the characters at all. Audience members are, unfortunately, too often too shallow to care about anything more than the scares. But this went a step further. There was one episode that reminded me of The Fly from Breaking Bad. The characters were confined to a space together while revealing conversation carried the episode. It was amazing, so well done, and worthy of being called a masterpiece. So I restarted the show from Season 1, Episode 1. I agreed with all the praise the show has received right up to the end of Episode 8. When that episode ended, I turned to my girlfriend and said, "You said this does have a satisfying ending, right?" She said, "Yes." "And it does tie everything up in a satisfying way?" "Oh yeah," she replied. But by the end of episode 9, I had lost my patience. The show appeared to be going nowhere. It started to appear as a very simple haunted house story that overcomplicated itself by using Pulp Fiction style editing, jumping between different moments and different timelines to slowly reveal the entire story. I thought to myself, there's no way they can tie this all up with one more episode. However, I had said that about Breaking Bad. One episode from the finale, they seemed so far from a satisfying conclusion. Boy, was I wrong. The finale of Breaking Bad was the greatest finale I've ever seen to a show, and one of the most satisfying, restrained, and perfect endings ever. I'd been wrong before, so I stuck it out. This time, I was right. The show concludes, and it all falls apart. There was strong character development and complicated editing of the timeline, which made you feel like it was building towards an ending that would leave you with answers, but still enough to analyze and talk about for a long time to come. Like the ending of Breaking Bad. The show really feels like it's heading that way, like it's going to be one of the greatest shows of all time. But in the end, it's just a haunted house story. No more complicated than Oculus, 1408, or The Grudge. The house has a history, but really it's haunted, and that's all there is to it. The editing was just a way of withholding information so you stuck around to hear the whole story. There's no big reveal, there's nothing. Explanation that is given feels more frustrating than satisfying. Think of Interstellar or Arrival. And the beautifully crafted character arcs conclude with a level of sappiness and self-importance felt by movies such as AI or Interstellar. It somehow taints everything that came before it. It all left me thinking, who cares? That was a complete waste of 10 hours. So now let's grade this thing. Cinematography. Did it get the job done? The cinematography gets the job done. By all standards, it's modern, sleek, and downright beautiful. I've heard other critics say things like, it looks expensive. Did I like it? I like Mike Flanagan's camera work. I like the camera angles he chooses. I like when the show goes for really wide angles. I like how beautiful it is. I like that the episode 2 Storms is made up of only a few shots and how perfectly these few shots are blocked out and achieved. I like the mood that the cinematography sets. My dislikes, on the other hand, were my initial and final thoughts. These being, please stop the fad of shallow depth of field and unrealistic color corrections. I'm not a master cinematographer, photographer, or colorist, but I do know that digital cameras have ushered in the fad of having the blurry background. Sometimes it works and is buttery, smooth, and beautiful. Other times, the depth of field is so shallow that almost nothing is in focus. There's one scene in the episode 2 Storms where there's a character in the foreground, in focus, with other characters standing behind him. The person directly behind him talks and is out of focus. Maybe we were supposed to be looking at the person in the foreground despite the person talking in the background. Maybe I'm nitpicking and this just doesn't matter. But overall, I found the blurry backgrounds and the too shallow depth of fields to be distracting enough and annoying enough not to give the cinematography a full 2 points. My next dislike is the color correction and the fad of orange and teal. Everything is orange and blue. There are select scenes where colors appear to be normal, but a lot of the times I would be pulled out of the show as I wondered what was wrong with the screen. If you're like me, and I really hope I'm not the only person who thinks this, you'll either think or say aloud, why does it look like the screen is dyed orange or blue? If you're at all familiar with digital photography or videography, you'll be aware of the popularity of shooting in log formats. These formats allow you to shoot an extremely flat, muddy image that holds tons of detail, the color and contrast of which can then be easily manipulated in post without distorting the image. The images that have come from this style of shooting are now extremely popular and fill The Haunting of Hill House. But I don't like them. They look flat, muddy, and discolored. Again, sometimes it's beautiful, but in Hill House, it made me say, why does it look like that? Enough times that I can't say I liked the cinematography. Next is acting. Did it get the job done? Oh my God, yes it did. I liked everything. Every performance is great. In fact, this is a show that's far more about the characters than anything else, and the phenomenal acting is one of the things that really makes this story work for me. I dislike nothing. Basically, this show is just filled with wall-to-wall great performances that will make other directors wish they could have actors this good in their movies. Next is music. Did it get the job done? The music, as with all Flanagan movies, is scored by the Newton brothers, and it gets the job done in terms of setting the mood. When the show needs to be sweet and sentimental, the music is exactly that. When the show needs to be dark and foreboding, the music is so. When everything needs to be scary, the music gets you there. Did I like it? Well, my likes are, number one, I like the main theme. It's good, not great. It sets the mood for the show very well. It seems to foreshadow darkness and mystery. Number two, I like how the Newton brothers craft very simple piano motifs that really emphasize the emotion of the scene without ever being too much. It's subtle, sweet, gentle, and beautiful. I like how some of the scenes use jump scare style booms in the music. Sometimes I feel like film composers get away with not writing something better by using simplicity, but here it's very effective. And finally, as I'm writing this review, I'm actually listening to the score. If you're like me and you love movie music, check out Beginning of the End Movement 1 through 4 on the soundtrack. Dislikes. I dislike that the score never goes above and beyond background music and or mood music. There are scores that are more than this and really add something special. For those scores, I need to be able to give them the credit they deserve. The Haunting of Hill House does not have one of those special scores. Next, we're going to talk about critics. The Rotten Tomatoes critic consensus reads, "The Haunting of Hill House is an effective ghost story whose steadily mounting anticipation is just as satisfying as its chilling payoff." 93%. A positive review by Sophie Gilbert of The Atlantic reads, "Over 10 episodes, it's stylish, moving, and sinister, riddled with ghosts both literal and metaphorical." A negative review by Graham Blundell of The Australian reads, "I found it perplexing and eventually irritating." I include that one negative review because it's clearly in the minority, but perfectly summarizing how I felt about the show. I found it perplexing and eventually irritating. Next is audience. Does it appeal to audiences in a traditional sense? Absolutely it does. It's scary, heartfelt, intriguing, and character-driven. In other words, there's a lot for audiences to latch onto. Speaking of character-driven, I think that's really what made critics and audiences alike fall in love with the show. There is one character at the center of each timeline, but these two characters serve as the catalyst for the story rather than the main character. The show is about the family, not any one member of it. Each episode does, however, put one family member at the center and allows their character to drive the story of that episode. There is bound to be at least one family member you come to care about, which then makes you invested in the show. It's difficult to make a character-driven story, but Hill House does it and does it well. Finally, we're going to talk about the story. Did it get the job done? Yes. Whether it's meant to be a ghost story, a family drama, or a character analysis, it achieves all of these. Did I like it? Well, that's complicated. As I said in the beginning, at first I did, but by the end, I hated it. So I'm going to stick to my usual outline and get the likes out of the way first. I like the characters. Even the character Shirley, who I didn't like, had one episode where I came to be very interested in her story and what happened to her character. I dislike the way the story is arranged. It's overcomplicated. Jumping between timelines and slowly revealing everything keeps you watching. But eventually, I felt like I had been tricked into paying attention. The payoffs are all so simple that it makes the setups seem meaningless. Number two, I dislike how sentimental it becomes. I want to say that I think I may be wrong here. When you listen to master filmmakers talk, you often hear them criticize endings that tie everything up in a little bow. They imply that this comes at the cost of giving the audience a more meaningful, thoughtful, and or appropriate ending. I have always disagreed. In an interview with Martin Scorsese's editor, Thelma Schoonmaker, She was asked what advice she'd give to aspiring filmmakers. She said, avoid cliche and sentimentality at all cost. Again, I disagree. I don't think she's wrong, but I don't think she's right in every situation. I think that sometimes, as said by screenwriter Blake Snyder, people want the same, only different. Think of John Wick. That movie was trying to be a good old-fashioned action movie, filled with all the standards, and people loved it for what it is. I think that sentimentality is also okay if it's not overused or forced in. Can you imagine if Spielberg said, let's avoid sentimentality, while putting together the end of E.T.? If you didn't like E.T., you weren't going to like the sentimentality. But for most people who watched the movie, the sentimentality is what makes the ending so emotional and moving. Despite my opinions stated above, this is exactly how I felt about the character development and conclusion to The Haunting of Hill House. I felt that it started to divulge into sentimentality. Character monologues started to feel like beating a dead horse. During one close to the end, the monologue began and I thought, well, this is interesting. But by the end, my face was scrunched up with a confused and slightly disgusted look on my face. It had become too much. I started to feel that the overused character monologues were plot devices to make you emotionally invested. It was laid on too thick and too often. When the show comes to a close, many of the characters' stories feel like they were forced into a positive change arc that ties everything up with a bow. Not perfectly, but enough for you to call it a happy ending. I've never been one to put down a happy ending, but here, it seemed out of place. At one point in the final minutes of the show, I said out loud, am I supposed to give a shit? Because I genuinely don't give a shit. Final score, 6.93 out of 10. Would I recommend it? Even though I ended up really hating the show because of the ending, I would still recommend it. The Haunting of Hill House is thoughtful, scary, heartfelt, and most people who have watched it have loved it. Who would I recommend it to? I would recommend this show to almost anyone and everyone. My girlfriend does not like slow-burning stories, but she really enjoyed this show, and also loved the same ending that turned me off. Again, my dislike for the show is in the minority opinion. This is a family drama and a character analysis wrapped in a haunted house story. There really is a lot to like to a very wide audience. Final thoughts and spoilers. Now I'd like to discuss more specifically some of the things that turned me off in the show and its ending. For this, I'll need to get into some spoilers. If you're not ready to hear about these, I'd like to say thank you for checking out this review. I hope you'll come back after you've watched the show to hear the rest. So, there were enough elements of Hill House to leave me pacing around my apartment mumbling about how much I hated it. Number one was the implication that time moves forwards and backwards. When the ghost of Eleanor appears in the final episode, she says, I thought for so long that time was like a line, that our moments were laid out like dominoes, and that they fell one into another. And on it went, just days tipping, one into the next, in a long line between the beginning and the end. But I was wrong. It's not like that at all. Our moments fall around us like rain, or the snow, or confetti. Maybe this is a beautiful thought and I'm a narrow-minded asshole, but to me, that reminded me of Interstellar and Arrival. Near the end, it is suddenly revealed that time does not move in a straight line and the characters were accessing information they received from their future selves. I simply cannot wrap my mind around this. I don't see how you could access moments that haven't happened yet. When she said that, I mumbled, are you fucking kidding me? Number two was how seriously the show takes itself. Recently, my brother Liam and I were going to watch a movie. I wanted to watch a horror movie, and he said, I don't really like to watch horror movies because a lot of times after they end, you're sad. This show is the exact kind of story Liam was referring to. My favorite part of the show was when Shirley punches Theodora in the boob. They both stand in shock until Theodora says, did you just punch me in the boob? It's one of the only humorous or lighthearted moments in the show. I know it's a serious show with a serious subject, but a little more humor would have made a big difference, in my opinion. Number 3 is too much talking. Kind of like this review. My favorite show of all time is Breaking Bad. That show has a lot of talking, but it always seemed so meaningful. Furthermore, it moved the story along in a purposeful way. The one episode that went really heavy on the talking was The Fly, an episode that confused and frustrated many viewers at the time, but has since come to be considered one of the best episodes of the entire show. It is literally 2 characters in conversation from beginning to end. When Better Call Saul, the Breaking Bad spinoff, came out, I watched all of season 1 and quit. The show was full of these long talking moments, but the amount that this talking propelled the story forward was a fraction of what was done in Breaking Bad. It felt pointless and boring. What happened to saying less with more? Or show don't tell? That's what I felt with this show. Too much talking that wasn't useful enough to be warranted. Number 4, the ending. At the conclusion, we find that the house was haunted and the mother had killed herself. That's really it. All of this could be gathered from the trailer. If you couldn't get this from the trailer, you certainly had gotten it by the end of episode 1 or at the latest episode 2. I'm sure somewhere a smarter and or more patient viewer was able to analyze the show and pull a deeper meaning out of the story and its ending. To me, however, it was just a haunted house and a vulnerable victim. To repeat what I said earlier in the review, it's much like 1408, Oculus, The Grudge, or even The Shining. All of which told a similar story in less time and more effectively. There is one thing this story does better, and it's the one thing I like. The Haunting of Hill House focuses more on facing your past to move on with your future, which I would say is the theme of the show. Face your past to save your future. If it hadn't been for the show talking too much, taking itself too seriously, and nonchalantly implicating an interstellar timeline twist, I may have been one more person saying this show is a masterpiece.